Welcome to The Weird introduce the audience to medieval folklore, what it is, how stories spread before TikTok, they had taverns. Set the tone, weird, creepy, but oddly cozy. Mention that most stories were about scaring people into behaving, or blaming elves for bad luck. Tease what's coming, witches, monsters, talking skulls. Chapter 2 Witches. Not what you think, forget broomsticks and Hogwarts. Medieval witches were way darker and sometimes just herbalists with bad timing. Talk about real witch hunting folklore and how people believed curses worked. Include weird rituals, tests for witches, and what to do if your cow suddenly died. Hint, blame the neighbor. Chapter 3 The Church versus Fairies. Yes, fairies, but not the cute kind. These were forest kidnappers with teeth. How Christianity tried to rewrite or bend old fairy lore. Stories of changelings, fairy babies swapped with human ones, elven seduction, and mysterious disappearances. Chapter 4 The Devil was busy. How the medieval mind blamed the devil for everything. Sneezes, storms, stubbed toes. Demons with chicken feet, goat horns, and complicated contracts. Explore folk tales of demonic pacts, crossroads meetings, and cursed objects. Chapter 5 Nightmares that had names: the mare night demon and sleep paralysis creatures. Tales of spirits sitting on your chest, stealing your breath, and whispering weird stuff in your dreams. Explain how people explain sleep problems with ghosts. Chapter 6 Talking animals with agendas: foxes who tricked priests, crows who cursed you, cats who were possibly spies for witches. Explore beast fables used as warnings or revenge. Stories. Some were funny, some were deeply unsettling. Chapter 7 The Forest Eats You. Forests were terrifying, dark, unknown, and full of things that wanted to snack on your soul. Creatures like the Leshy, forest spirits, and wolf men. Include real beliefs about trees whispering and why people left offerings to stumps. Chapter 8 Saintly Bizarre. Some saints had very weird miracles, like heads that kept talking after being chopped off, relics, blood that boiled, and saints who cursed entire towns for being rude. Blend church history with local legend. Chapter 9 The Plague and the Panic. When the Black Death came, so did the superstitions. Dance until you die. It's a real thing, and people blame demons. Explore how desperate people turned to folklore to explain death. Chapter 10 Monsters under the bed, boogeymen, shadow people, and under the bed creepers. How parents use terrifying tales to get their kids to behave or stay in bed. If you leave the house at night, the plague rat man will get you. Chapter 11 The Undead that weren't vampires. Medieval folklore about revenants, the dead who didn't stay dead. Stories of corpses knocking on doors, bloated with blood. Explain how this predates the Dracula myth. Chapter 12 are curses and talismans, the magic of everyday objects, bones, shoes in walls, salt over shoulders. Explain how people protected themselves from evil or cursed their enemies. Spells written backwards, nail clippings, and very suspicious bread. Chapter 13 Folklore Courtroom. Trials of the absurd trials where animals were put on trial. For crimes, yes. Pigs got lawyers. Witches who confessed to turning into owls and flying into storms. Absurd but very real records from medieval folklore-based trials. Chapter 14 Folklore in Disguise. How old pagan myths survive by wearing Christian costumes. Old gods turned into saints. Monsters turned into devils. Folklore as a game of historical telephone. Chapter 15 Why We're Still Haunted. Wrap-up chapter. Why these old stories still chill us, make us giggle, or creep us out in the Middle of the night. Tie it all back to the human need to explain the scary, weird, and unfair. End with a wink and a yawn. Sleep tight. And maybe check under the bed one last time. Next step. Shall I begin with Chapter 1? Welcome to the weird 1,000 to 1,100 words in the style you requested? Just say yes. Start with Chapter 1, and I'll dive right in. You said. Yeshak said. Great. Let's begin your video script. Chapter 1. Welcome to the weird word count, approximately 1075 from your series, The Disturbing World of Medieval Folklore. Boring history for sleep. Hello again, sleepy listener. Still awake? That's brave, because tonight we're going to the Middle Ages, and no, not the shiny nighttime princess version. We're going deeper. Into the dirt, into the dark, into the disturbing. This is the world of medieval folklore, a place where fairies kidnap babies, cats are accused of witchcraft, and if your bread goes moldy, well, it might just be cursed. So fluff your pillow, get cozy, and maybe keep one eye open, just in case something weird scuttles out from under the bed. Back then, people didn't have science or Google or even books. What they had was stories told by firelight, passed from mouth to mouth, changed with each retelling, like a medieval game of broken telephone. If someone got sick, it wasn't germs, it was a spell. If the crops failed, elves. If you stepped on a weird stone and your leg went numb, definitely goblins, and honestly, you can't really blame them. The medieval world was chaotic, dangerous, and absolutely unpredictable. Plagues, famines, bandits, and questionable hygiene. So people turned to what they did understand: fear, faith, and folklore. Let's talk about who spread these tales. The villagers, the drunk guy at the tavern, the local priest with slightly too many relics. Everyone had a story. But the biggest stars of folklore, grandmas. Yep, medieval grandmothers were basically walking libraries. Need a tale about a girl who disobeyed and got eaten by wolves? Grandma's got it. Want to hear about a saint who exploded because someone looked at him funny? Pull up a chair, child. And these weren't just bedtime stories. Folklore shaped how people lived, what they feared, and who they blamed. Here's a fun example. Let's say your cow suddenly drops dead. In our modern world, you'd call a vet, but in the medieval world, you gather the neighbors, point to that weird old lady who talks to her cat, and whisper, "She hexed my cow." Boom. Now we've got a witch on our hands, and a whole chapter coming about her later. Folklore wasn't just entertainment. It was how people made sense of stuff, especially the scary stuff, like death, disease, sudden misfortune, or that time you woke up with a nightmare and blamed it on a demon sitting on your chest. That's a real thing. We'll get to it. Now here's where it gets juicy. These stories weren't always made up. Some of them came from actual trials, real people, even royal records. Like the time a pig was put on trial for murder. Yes, a pig, with a lawyer, in a courtroom. And no, that's not the fever dream of a medieval farmer. That's history. We'll dig into that in Chapter 13. You're not ready. You might be wondering, were these people just superstitious? Or were they creative geniuses with no internet? Honestly, a bit of both. They believed in fairies that stole babies. But they also invented unicorns. They were terrified of demons who whispered temptations. But they also believed in saints who glowed in the dark and turned rivers into wine. It was a strange cocktail of religion, fear, nature, and imagination. And here's the kicker. Most of this folklore wasn't even written down until centuries later. It lived in the air, in whispers, in chants, in songs sung while churning butter or sweeping the graveyard. It shifted shape over time, like the very creatures it described. A story that started in Ireland as a forest spirit might reappear, in Germany as a goblin, then in France as a devil, and eventually in a Disney movie wearing pants. Folklore has legs. Creepy, hairy legs that sometimes come crawling out of your chimney at night. Let me give you a sneak peek of what's ahead. Witches who fly, but not the way you think. Fairies who are basically forest kidnappers with wings. Demons with the face of a goat, body of a man, and the voice of your ex. Saints who got very dramatic. Curses hidden in everyday stuff, like shoes, bones, or your uncle's bad jokes. And best of all, it's not just spooky, it's funny, too, because medieval folklore is full of accidental comedy. Like the guy who tried to summon a demon but ended up stuck in a wine barrel. Or the woman who said she could control the weather and then got blamed when it rained on someone's wedding. Witches, not what you think word count, approximately 1085 from your series, The Disturbing World of Medieval Folklore. Boring history for sleep, alright. Sleepyhead. You're still here, still curled up, still curious. Or maybe you just dropped your phone on your face and accidentally hit play again. Either way, welcome back. Tonight, we're stirring the pot. Literally, because this chapter is all about witches. But forget what Hollywood taught you. No sparkly spales. No elegant capes. No Hogwarts acceptance letters. Medieval witches. They were feared, hunted, burned, and sometimes completely made up. Let's start with a cold truth. Back then, you didn't need to be magical to be a witch. You just had to be inconvenient, too loud, too quiet, too poor, too smart. Congratulations. You're probably a witch. Now, here's where folklore takes over. The medieval mind didn't think witches were just misunderstood women with herbs and vibes. Oh no, they were believed to be devil-worshipping, baby-boiling, weather-controlling agents of chaos. Let me say that again. Baby-boiling. They were actual stories about witches stealing newborns to cook into potions, not because it was true, but because it scared people just enough to feel righteous when they lit a bonfire under someone's feet. But why all the fear? Because witches, in folklore, broke the rules. They didn't pray to the right god. They whispered strange words under the moonlight. They healed people with plants instead of prayers. And worst of all, they didn't always care what the village priest thought. In a time when the church was king and everyone was terrified of hell, the idea of someone tapping into dark powers was too juicy to ignore. So folklore grew wild, like weeds in a graveyard. Let's talk flying. You know, the classic witch on a broom thing. Yeah, that's folklore, and it's way stranger than you think. Some old tales said witches didn't really fly. At least, not physically. Instead, they rubbed a special potion on their bodies and tripped absolute medieval balls. We're talking full-on psychedelic broomstick journeys. This wasn't air travel. It was mind travel. Where did they go? Folklore said they flew to secret gatherings called Sabbaths. Big, creepy parties where witches danced with demons, kissed the devil's backside, don't ask, and made plans to ruin crops and steal husbands. Basically, bad vibes only. Now, you might ask, were there actual witches doing any of this? Nope. At least, not in the way the story said. Most accused witches were just normal people, midwives, healers, widows, lonely old women. They knew how to use herbs, They had cats. They didn't fit in. And when something bad happened, a sick child, a spoiled harvest, people needed someone to blame. Folklore filled in the gaps. Oh, that goat died. Definitely a hex. Oh, your beer turned sour. Witchcraft. Oh, your bread collapsed. Someone must have cursed your oven. Let's pause for a weird one. There's an actual tale from medieval Europe about a woman who could turn into an owl. She was said to sneak into homes through windows at night, sit on people's chests, and suck the life out of them. People swore they saw feathers on her floor, and guess what? When a woman in town was accused of being that owl, they tied her up and looked for bird marks. Folklore didn't need facts, it just needed fear. Now here's a favorite, the witch's mark. This was believed to be a secret spot on the body, a mole, freckle, or birthmark where the devil suckled his witches. Yes, suckled, like a demon baby goat. Witch hunters would strip suspects naked, poke them with needles, and if the person didn't scream, they'd say, "Aha, that's the mark, she's a witch." So basically, be ticklish equals safe, not ticklish equals bonfire. But not all witch folklore was cruel. Some witches were said to be helpful, sort of. These were called cunning folk. They used charms and potions to heal, find lost items, or even uncurse people. Think medieval. Customer service for spiritual problems, but it was a thin line. One day, you're curing someone's toothache with a sage poultice. Next day, someone accuses you of turning into a goat at night and summoning hailstorms. Rough times. Honestly, the most disturbing part of all this, it wasn't just fantasy. Folklore made its way into laws, trials, and executions. Real people were tortured and killed, not for doing anything magical, but because enough people believed the folklore. Belief turned fear into action, and fear, especially when wrapped in a spooky bedtime tale, is powerful. But even through all the darkness, there's something weirdly fascinating about these stories. They show us what people were afraid of, and what they dreamed about. They tell us that the line between healer and witch, story and truth, was as thin as a spider's thread. And they remind us that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't in the forest, they're in our heads. The church verses, fairies would count, approximately 1070 from your series, The Disturbing World of Medieval Folklore, boring history for sleep. So you're still here, cozy in bed, wrapped in a blanket, and now it's time to talk about fairies. Wait, don't roll your eyes. I'm not talking about glittery creatures with butterfly wings who grant wishes and hang out in garden centers. Nope. Medieval fairies were something else. Mysterious, dangerous, kinda rude. And according to folklore, very good at kidnapping your baby and replacing it with a demon. So fluff your pillow and keep one hand over your toes, because the fairies in this chapter, they bite. Let's rewind. Before the church had its big glow up in medieval Europe, cathedrals, monks, confession booths, people in villages believed in all sorts of things. Spirits, forest beings, hidden folk. These weren't just cute bedtime stories. They were part of everyday survival. The crops failed. Maybe the fairies were angry. Your cousin wandered into the woods and never came back. Probably got taken by the good people. And, yes, that's what they were sometimes called, because calling them by name could attract them. And you did not want that. Closing parenthesis now. When the church rolled in, it had a bit of a PR problem. How do you convince people to worship saints and follow rules when they're still leaving milk out for tiny forest creatures? So what did the church do? Well, it started demonizing the fairies. Literally. Suddenly, fairies weren't mysterious nature spirits, they were fallen angels, or minor demons, or tools of the devil himself, out to tempt you with sparkles and ruin your soul. Nice rebranding, huh? But people didn't let go of their fairy tales that easily, because here's the thing. Folklore isn't just about belief. It's about culture. It's how people made sense of the weird stuff life threw at them. And fairies. They were the go-to explanation for anything strange. A child who wouldn't stop crying, no matter what. Changelings. Fairies were said to steal healthy babies and leave behind a sick, shriveled, eerie double, a changeling. And no, there were no baby return policies. There were entire rituals to get your real baby back. Some involved fire, others involved yelling insults at the changeling. One included holding the baby over a fire to scare the fairy out. Disturbing. Absolutely. But it came from a place of desperate love and a total lack of science. Fairies also explain disappearances. You go into the woods to gather firewood and never come back. Your neighbors would say, nodding wisely. The fairies took him, and honestly, that was easier to believe than wolves or bandits. It added mystery, and just enough hope that maybe, he was still dancing at a fairy feast, under some enchanted hill, because fairy folklore wasn't just scary, it was tempting. Let's talk about fairy rings. You know those little circles of mushrooms you sometimes see in forests or meadows. Back then, people believed those were danger zones, the site of fairy dances. Step inside one, and boom, you're trapped in their world. Sometimes forever, other times, you come back and realize 100 years have passed. Pretty dramatic for a bunch of mushrooms, right? But here's the best part. People knew fairies were dangerous, but they still tried to please them. They left out food. They avoided saying their names. They knocked 3 times before entering certain groves. In some places, there were even special doors built into hillsides, not for humans, but for the hidden folk to come and go. Respect, fear, and a little superstition, all wrapped up in a bedtime story. The church, however, was not amused. Priests preached that these rituals were sinful. Confessing your sins was fine, but talking to fairies, straight to hell. Some sermons even warned that fairies were disguises used by Satan to lure the faithful away. If you danced with them, they said, you might never come back. And worse, you'd lose your soul. That's how deep the folklore ran. Deep enough to make the church nervous. But here's a twist. Even priests sometimes believed in fairies. There are records of monks writing about them, describing sightings, even suggesting that some saints had encounters with fairy-like beings. But, of course, holy ones, because when you mix old beliefs with new religion, things get complicated. In the end, fairy folklore became a kind of battleground, a tug-of-war between pagan past and Christian order. And though the church tried hard to erase it, the stories survived. They slipped into lullabies. They danced through folk tales, and they curled up beside you, whispering from the shadows. The devil was busy. Word count, approximately 1080 from your series, The Disturbing World of Medieval Folklore. Boring history for sleep. Hello again, brave sleeper. Tonight, we're talking about the one character who shows up in almost every medieval story that needed a villain, a scapegoat, or just a little extra drama. Yup, the devil, Old Nick, the Prince of Darkness. Or, as one 12th century monk called him, that slithering trickster who dances behind misfortune. Catchy? Right. Now, to be clear, we're not diving into theology. This isn't Sunday school. This is folklore, and in folklore, The devil wasn't just evil, he was everywhere, blamed for everything. And honestly, sometimes kind of goofy. Let's set the stage. In the Middle Ages, life was full of danger and confusion. Plagues, famines, bad weather, angry landlords, and no Google to explain any of it. So when something went wrong, and it often did, people wanted answers. Enter the devil. He became the medieval version of blame the system, bad crops. Devil, a kid acting weird. Devil, you trip and fall on your face in front of your crush. Yup, definitely devil. But folklore didn't picture him as just some evil cloud of vibes. No, the devil had form. Usually, hooves for feet, horns on his head, a tail often curly, for some reason, and sometimes a chicken's leg. Yeah, not super intimidating, but weirdly common. He was described as hairy, cloven-footed, and sometimes charming, until he tricked you into eternal doom. Think used car salesman meets goat, with a minor in dramatic entrances. Now, folklore was full of devil deals. You know the drill. A desperate person wants something. Love, money, revenge, maybe a really nice cow. So the devil appears, often at a crossroads, or in a storm, and offers a deal. You give me your soul, he says, and I'll give you what you want. The person says yes. Signs a contract, usually in blood, because regular ink just didn't have enough flair. And then, boom, instant regret. Turns out, the money turns to dirt. The cow explodes. The love interest runs off with a monk. Classic. Here's the thing. Folklore loved to warn people. These devil deal stories weren't just spooky entertainment. They were medieval cautionary tales. Don't be greedy. Don't be proud. And definitely, don't make deals with hooved strangers at crossroads. One popular tale told of a man who sold his soul for the ability to win any argument. Sounds useful, right? But then he realized no one wanted to talk to him anymore. He was alone. He spent eternity arguing with himself. Honestly, sounds like Twitter. And then there were the devil prank stories. Yeah, not all of them were serious. Some were weirdly funny. Like the tale of the blacksmith who tricked the devil 3 times in a row, trapping him in various objects, an anvil, a tree, a shoe, and refusing to let him go unless he promised to never take his soul. The devil agreed, sulking, but when the blacksmith finally died, he wasn't allowed into heaven or hell, so he just wandered the earth, carrying a burning coal in a carved-out turnip. Yes, that's the origin of the jack-o'-lantern. Folklore. It always comes full circle. But, of course, not all devil stories were harmless. Some were used to justify real-world horror. Like we mentioned with witches, people were accused of working with the devil, and that was all it took for punishment. Any kind of strangeness could be explained away as devil influence, to clever, devil helped you, to lucky, devil blessed you, to sad, devil possessed you, to good at chess. Definitely suspicious. In this way, folklore fed into fear, and fear fed into persecution. Still, despite being the ultimate villain, the devil wasn't always portrayed as invincible. In many stories, he gets tricked, outwitted, or humiliated. Monks sprinkle holy water. Peasants recite the Lord's Prayer backward. Children leave out salt. Apparently he hates it. One tale tells of a woman who threw her wooden shoes at him and made him cry. Iconic. Folklore loved a twist, especially when it made evil look foolish. And of course, there's the classic image, the devil waiting at the bottom of the hill, grinning, pitchfork ready. But in many tales, he's lonely, sad, desperate for souls that don't fall for his tricks anymore. Because eventually, people got smarter, and folklore began to change. The devil went from terror to punchline in some places. And honestly, that might be the best revenge. Nightmares that had names would count. Approximately 1078 from your series, The Disturbing World of Medieval Folklore. Boring history for sleep. Welcome back. Dream Traveler, you're still listening, still drifting, and now we enter the space between sleep and waking, that fuzzy place where your mind starts wandering, and suddenly, something sitting on your chest. Nope, not your cat, not your blanket bunched up, not a weird sleep position. Tonight, we're talking about nightmares and the creepy medieval creatures people blamed for them, because back then, nightmares weren't just bad dreams. They were visitors, with names and jobs, and their job was to terrify you. Let's start with the star of the show, the mare. No, not the horse. This mare was a supernatural being, a sort of shadowy spirit, who crept into people's rooms at night and sat on their chest, causing fear, breathlessness, and terrifying dreams. Sound familiar? That's because this ancient belief is one of the earliest descriptions of what we now call sleep paralysis. But back then, science wasn't around to explain why your brain freezes your body while you dream. So naturally, it had to be something evil. The mare didn't just bring nightmares. She was the nightmare. Fun fact, that's actually where the word nightmare comes from. Night plus mare equals nightmare. You're welcome. You now have a degree in folklore linguistics. Diplomas mailed never. Anyway, the mare wasn't alone. Medieval folklore had a whole lineup of night demons, creatures who messed with you while you were asleep. One of them, incubi and succubi. These were demons who'd sneak into your bed and, let's just say, get romantic without asking. The incubus was usually male, the succubus female, and both were blamed for all kinds of things: unwanted pregnancies, sleep disorders, and even wet dreams. Yup. Medieval people had a very creative way of explaining certain nighttime activities. It wasn't me. It was the demon. Classic defense. Then there was the Alp, a creature from German folklore. He wore a hat. Yes, really. A little magical cap called a Tarn-cap that made him invisible. He'd slip into your dreams, twist them into nightmares, and leave you sweaty, gasping, and confused when you woke up. And sometimes he'd drink your blood through your nipples. Don't ask. Medieval folklore was weird. So what did people do to stop these dream demons? Well, they tried everything. Sleeping with iron scissors under your pillow, drawing protective circles around your bed, hanging herbs like St. John's wort or rosemary near the door, then placing a broom by your bed. The logic being that the demon would get distracted and start counting the bristles. Yes, counting. Apparently demons are bad at math and very easily sidetracked. Just like me when I open my phone to check one message and end up watching raccoon videos for an hour. But it wasn't just demons. Sometimes the fear came from ghosts. People believed the souls of the restless dead could wander at night, causing nightmares and illness, especially if they died angry or unburied. So it was common to sprinkle salt around the bed or sleep with holy relics nearby, just in case. Basically, bedtime in medieval times wasn't chill. It was a full-on spiritual security system. Even animals weren't safe. Cats, especially black ones, were often thought to carry spirits, or even be spirits themselves. If your cat stared too long at a corner of the room, probably a ghost. If it jumped on your chest at night, possessed. If it purred too loudly, definitely up to something. Poor cats. They were just trying to nap and vibe. But in medieval folklore, they were basically walking omens. And then there's the classic image, the person who wakes up in the middle of the night, can't move, can't scream, and feels a heavy pressure on their chest. Today, we call that sleep paralysis. Back then, the demon is sitting on you, you're being visited. Your soul is under attack. And the thing is, that kind of fear sticks. Even now, people who experience sleep paralysis often say it feels supernatural. So maybe, in some strange way, medieval folklore wasn't totally wrong. Maybe nightmares are more than dreams. Maybe they're stories we tell ourselves to explain what we can't explain. Talking animals with agendas. Word count approximately 1084 from your series, The Disturbing World of Medieval Folklore. Boring history for sleep still awake, or just barely hanging on. Either way, welcome back to the medieval madness. We've talked about demons, witches, and the devil himself. But now it's time for something that sounds cute, but really isn't. Talking animals. No, not like in Disney movies. These animals didn't break into song or solve mysteries with teenagers in vans. They were cunning, petty, sometimes wise, sometimes terrifying, and always up to something. Because in medieval folklore, animals didn't just talk, they manipulated, confessed, and occasionally got sentenced to death in court. Yeah, we'll get there. Let's start with the most famous chatterbox of them all, Reynard the Fox. This guy was a legend. Literally, he showed up in medieval fables all across Europe. Sly, smug, and always one step ahead of everyone else. Reynard tricked wolves, robbed chickens, lied to kings, and once even faked his own death to escape a trial. A fox with a flair for drama. We love to see it. In some stories, Reynard's enemies were all high-ranking animals, the Lion King, the Bear Judge, the Wolf Knight, and yet Reynard outwitted them all with lies, flattery, and just enough chaos to keep things spicy. He was folklore's original con artist. Like if Loki and Bugs Bunny had a baby, and that baby had fleas. Now, these stories weren't just funny. They had a message. Medieval people used talking animals to teach lessons about greed, pride, trickery, and occasionally how not to get eaten. It was basically morality theater with fur. But not all animal stories were playful. Some were dark. Let's talk about cats. In medieval Europe, cats were complicated. Some people saw them as graceful, mysterious helpers. Others saw them as witches in disguise, especially black cats. Those poor creatures got blamed for everything. Bad luck, failed harvests, plagues, even storms. There were stories of cats who spoke Latin, cats who cursed priests, cats who exploded when sprinkled with holy water. And, in some places, people genuinely believed that witches could turn into cats to sneak into homes or spy on their neighbors. Honestly, if cats could talk, they'd probably deny everything and then knock your cup off the table just for fun. Then we've got the birds. Birds were often messengers in folklore, but not always friendly ones. Owls, for example, were considered omens of death. If one hooted outside your window, bad news. Someone nearby was probably going to die. Crows and ravens weren't much better. They were seen as graveyard birds, carriers of souls, or spies for darker forces. And sometimes they talked. There's a story of a raven who flew into a courtroom and shouted. He did it. Everyone panicked. The guy on trial fainted. No one knew what the bird meant, but it was enough to declare a guilty verdict. Thanks, feathered snitch. Then there were wolves, big stars in medieval folklore. Not just scary beasts, but creatures caught between wild and human. There were tales of wolves who spoke in riddles, wolves who guarded sacred sites, wolves who turned into men, or men who turned into wolves. More on that in a later chapter. And of course, they were often used to teach obedience. Don't wander too far from home, a parent might say. Or the talking wolf will get you, which is very effective if your kid is 6 and terrified of talking animals in cloaks. Now, this next part. Buckle up. Because sometimes animals didn't just talk. They stood trial. Yes, real, legal trials, with judges and lawyers and sentences. There are documented cases from the Middle Ages of animals, pigs, cows, goats, rats, being put on trial for crimes like murder, or property damage, or being generally suspicious. Here's a real example. A pig in 1386 was tried in France for killing a child. They dressed it in human clothes. David, a lawyer, found it guilty and sentenced it to public execution. Let that sink in. Somewhere in history, a French judge banged a gavel and said, "The pig did it," and people applauded. All because of folklore, the belief that animals had morals, intentions, and could be held accountable for their actions. Spoiler, they couldn't. But try telling that to a medieval courtroom. Why did people do this? Well, partly to scare others into behaving. Partly because justice had to be seen being done, even if the criminal was a goat. And partly because animals were seen as spiritual beings, capable of sin, loyalty, revenge, and, in rare cases, speaking truth when no one else would. The Forest Eats You word count, approximately 1077 from your series, The Disturbing World of Medieval Folklore. Boring history for sleep. You're still with me. Tucked in, lights low, eyes heavy, perfect, because tonight we're stepping off the path into the thick, dark, whispering world of the medieval forest. Now, modern forests can be peaceful. Birdsong, pine needles, the occasional squirrel giving you side eye. But to the medieval mind, forests were not serene. They were dangerous, untamed, and full of things that wanted to eat you, curse you, or swap you for moss and never look back. In folklore, the forest was a character, and not the friendly kind. Let's start with a mood check. Back then, most people lived in small villages surrounded by deep woods. These forests were huge, dark, largely unexplored, and, crucially, loud at night, cracking branches, distant howls, trees that seemed to move when you weren't looking. To people without flashlights or Google Maps, the forest felt like a living, breathing creature, a place where the rules didn't apply. So folklore filled the gaps. One of the most common forest beings in medieval stories, the Leshy. This creature came from Slavic folklore and was said to be a tall, green-skinned man, made of bark and leaves, who could grow as tall as a tree or shrink to the size of a blade of grass. His job, leading travelers astray. He'd whistle like the wind, call your name in your own voice, and suddenly, you'd be walking in circles, and if he really didn't like you, well, some versions say he'd steal your soul and plant it in a stump. Cool. Then there were the forests. Witches. Not your classic broom riders. These witches lived deep in the woods, away from villages, surrounded by bones and herbs and secrets. If you were desperate, you might go find one. For a love potion, a curse lifted, or revenge, but the rules were strict. Never look them in the eye. Never say thank you. Never ask about the bones. Because if you messed up, you might walk back out of the forest with someone else's voice, or no shadow, or not at all. And let's not forget the wild men, sometimes called wood woses, covered in hair, strong as bears, and silent unless provoked. Some stories painted them as ancient, wise beings who knew the secrets of nature. Others said they ate people. Mood swings. I guess they were often drawn in medieval art. Big, hairy dudes with clubs, somewhere between a caveman and a forest cryptid. Folklore treated them like a warning. Don't go too far. Don't act too wild, or you become something else. Now, here's where things get really creepy. The forest could take people. And not just in a they got lost kind of way. In a they were swallowed up and never existed again kind of way. One day, your cousin Gerald goes mushroom picking. Next day, poof, gone. And no one asks questions. Because everyone knows what happened. The forest took him, they'd whisper. No drama, no rescue mission, just quiet acceptance that sometimes the trees get hungry. To protect themselves. People did what people always do, made up rules. Never whistle after dark. Don't follow lights in the distance. They're not stars, they're lures. If a tree suddenly grows in a spot where no tree ever stood, don't touch it. It's watching. And if you had to enter the woods, you left a gift, bread, milk, a silver coin. Something to tell the spirits, hey, I'm just visiting. Please don't eat me. And speaking of spirits, there were a lot. Some believed the forest was full of souls that had no grave. Wanderers, warriors, people who died angry. They'd hang around, whispering in the leaves, tugging at your clothes, looking for company. Others swore they saw ghost animals, stags with glowing eyes, dogs with no shadows, crows that repeated things they'd never heard out loud. If you saw one, you turned around, or prayed, or threw salt over your shoulder and hoped it wasn't already too late. But not all forest folklore was deadly. Some stories told of hidden villages, places that only appeared once a year under a full moon. If you found them, you might be fed and welcomed, or trapped there forever, dancing to music no one else could hear. Charming. So why all this fear? Because the forest was unknown, and unknown things, well, they demand stories. People created monsters, witches, and ancient spirits to explain the darkness, the silence. The way trees sometimes seem to lean in just a little too close, and honestly, can you blame them? Even now, deep woods can feel eerie. Our modern brains might laugh it off, but some part of us still listens when a branch snaps behind us, still glances back when we're walking alone, just in case. So if you ever wander through a forest, stick to the path, don't talk to the trees. And if the wind starts whispering your name, walk a little faster. Next time, we'll leave the woods behind and head into the churches, because even saints had stories. And some of those stories are absolutely unhinged. Sanely bizarre word count, approximately 1092 from your series, The Disturbing World of Medieval Folklore. Boring history for sleep. You made it out of the forest, still breathing, still blinking, maybe still clutching your blanket like a medieval charm. Good, because tonight we're going somewhere safe. Holy, even, we're going to church. But not just any church. We're stepping into the world of medieval saints, the original influencers of the holy world, miracle workers, martyrs, monster fighters, and, occasionally, people who smelled like roses after death. We'll get there. Now, in the Middle Ages, saints were a big deal. People didn't just admire saints. They worshipped, prayed to, traveled miles to visit their bones, and told wildly dramatic stories about them. Some were based on real people, others, total Folklore legends. And the stranger the story, the more people believed it. Let's start light. Meet Saint Denis, patron saint of Paris. Great guy, loved God, preached the gospel, got his head chopped off, as saints often did. But Denis, he was extra. Legend says after his beheading, he picked up his own head, tucked it under his arm, and walked 6 kilometers, still preaching the entire way. Imagine you're walking to market, and some guy with a halo and a detached head wanders past you giving a sermon like, "Repent." Also, do you have a towel? Medieval people loved it. Instant sainthood. Then there's Saint Margaret of Antioch. She was thrown in prison for refusing to marry a Roman official, and while locked up, she was, I kid you not, swallowed whole by a dragon. But Margaret had a secret weapon, a small wooden cross, inside the dragon's stomach. She made the sign of the cross, and the dragon exploded. She walked out, dusted herself off, and became the patron saint of childbirth, because obviously, being inside a dragon counts as symbolic labor. Another classic. Saint Christina the Astonishing, and her name was no joke. Christina died young, or so everyone thought. During her funeral, she suddenly sat up in the coffin, floated to the ceiling, and declared she'd been to heaven and come back to warn everyone about sin. Then she spent the rest of her life doing extremely weird things, like sleeping in ovens to feel the pain of hell, bathing in freezing rivers in winter, hiding in bell towers to avoid the smell of sign. Basically, she was a one-woman medieval horror film, but holy, and people loved her for it. Now, not all saints were dramatic. Some were oddly specific. Like Saint Drogo, the patron saint of unattractive people. Not even kidding. Or Saint Barbara, who protects you from sudden death by cannon, which, apparently, was a thing. Or Saint Fiacre, patron saint of hemorrhoids. He had a healing garden. You do the math. But here's where folklore really kicks in. Saint relics. These were physical pieces of saints, bones, hair, teeth, clothing, believed to hold divine power. Churches competed to get them. Pilgrims traveled across continents just to look at a toe bone in a glass box. And sometimes, those relics got a little shady. Multiple churches claimed to have the same saint's skull. They were reportedly for heads of John the Baptist floating around Europe. I don't know how many heads he had, but that seems excessive, and relics weren't just collected. They were used. People touched them to cure diseases, put them under pillows to stop nightmares, held them in courtrooms to swear oaths. I swear on St. George's left kneecap that I didn't steal your cow. It was kind of like holy merch, but way more intense. Some saints were famous for what happened after death, like Saint Rita, whose body was said to never rot and constantly smelled like roses, even centuries after death. Or Saint Bernadette, whose corpse was exhumed multiple times and somehow didn't decay. People took that as a sign of sainthood. Meanwhile, medieval folks would be like, "Yep, she's glowing slightly and smells like Lila. She's fine. Put her in a glass case and light some candles." But here's the deeper layer. All these weird, magical stories, they gave people hope. Life in the Middle Ages was rough. War, disease, famine, demons, bad plumbing. So when someone said, "Hey, there's a woman who exploded a dragon with a prayer," people clung to it, because it meant the world wasn't just cruel, it was strange, mystical, and maybe a little fair, if you knew where to look. And honestly, it still kind of works. Even now. The idea of someone fighting off monsters with nothing but faith and a wooden stick. It sticks with us. Maybe it's comforting. Maybe it's inspiring. Or maybe we just like the drama of a holy person walking around with a head under one arm. Either way, saints gave the Middle Ages something to believe in, something powerful, something slightly unhinged, and always worth telling stories about. The Goat Man cometh word count, approximately 1080 from your series, The Disturbing World of Medieval Folklore, Boring History for Sleep Okay. Let's set the scene. It's late. You're wrapped in your blanket burrito. The world's gone quiet, and, somewhere in the distance, you hear hooves. Click clack, click clack. Not a horse. Not a deer. Something else. Something older. Something that knows how to dance. Tonight, we're talking about one of folklore's strangest figures, the Goat Man. Now, the Goat Man isn't just one guy, he's more like a category, a fuzzy, hoofed, horned bundle of vibes that pops up in different cultures under different names. But the energy is always the same, wild, mischievous, dangerous, a little too sexy. In medieval Europe, he was often known as the satyr thanks to the Greeks or the faun thanks to the Romans. Half man, half goat, fully chaotic, but medieval Christianity. They saw something else. They looked at this dancing, flute-playing, wine-chugging woodland creature and said, "Yep, that's the devil. To be fair, he kind of had the branding down, horns, hooves, mischief, oh yes, plays. Music that makes you lose your mind and forget your chores." So the church took the image and said, "Let's make this the face of temptation." Suddenly, goat-like figures were turning up in medieval cautionary tales, whispering lies, luring travelers, inviting lonely shepherds to midnight parties that ended very badly. One of the most famous versions. The sabbatical goat. Picture this. It's midnight. You're deep in the woods. And there, surrounded by witches and flickering firelight, is a huge goat-headed man with wings and glowing eyes. He's seated on a throne. Witches are dancing. Bread is flying. There is cheese involved. This is the witches' Sabbath, a legendary secret gathering that haunted medieval imaginations. And in the middle of it all, the Goat Man. Leading rituals, demanding kisses on his tail, passing out forbidden knowledge. Fun for the whole coven. Now, was any of this real? Nope. But the belief was. People were terrified of the idea that somewhere, in the dark woods, women were meeting a horned being who taught them spells and made them feel powerful. And the Goat Man, he became a symbol of everything the church feared. Wildness, rebellion, nature, lust, cheese-based rituals across history. Fear and dairy have been surprisingly linked. But it wasn't all fire and brimstone. Some versions of the Goat Man were more whimsical. Take Pan, for example, the ancient Greek god of nature, shepherds, and slyly creepy forest parties. Pan had goat legs, a pan flute, and a habit of showing up uninvited. Medieval folks inherited some of that folklore. In certain regions, goat men were seen as guardians of the wild. They could protect travelers, or prank them mercilessly. You never knew which mood they were in. Basically, chaotic neutral with hooves. And speaking of pranks, let's talk about the wild hunt. In this legendary procession, a ghostly host would thunder through the skies or forests at night. Sometimes they were dead warriors, sometimes fae, sometimes led by Odin himself, but in a few versions. You guessed it, a Goat Man leads the hunt, blowing a horn, riding a black stag, chasing down souls who broke the rules of nature. Hear the hunt, and you are supposed to drop flat on the ground and stay quiet. Move, and they might take you with them. Forever. But here's the thing. Why were goat figures so common and so creepy? It's not just the horns. Goats are weird. They scream like people, climb like demons, have eyes that look straight into your sins. And they don't care about your personal space. So imagine living in a time when superstition ruled, and you see a goat standing upright on a hill, staring at you while chewing grass sideways. Yeah, that's a demon, or a saint, or both. Medieval villagers told stories to explain what they saw and feared. A goat that walked through fire and didn't burn, that's the devil. A strange man with hooves who played music that made girls dance until dawn. That's dangerous magic, a whisper in the dark woods that sounded like laughter. That's the goat man. Stay home. So the legend grew, passed from fire to fire, from scared farmers to wide-eyed children, and the goat man danced on. But maybe he wasn't always evil. Maybe he was just the wildness humans tried to forget. The ancient forest spirits in disguise, the freedom they feared and secretly wanted, because in a world ruled by strict rules and tight faith, the goat man offered a reminder: there's still magic out here, and it doesn't follow your rules. Cursed Cuisine word count, approximately 1090 from your series, The Disturbing World of Medieval Folklore, Boring History for Sleep. Let's be honest. When we think medieval food, we picture giant turkey legs, trenchers of bread, and maybe a king with gravy in his beard. But tonight's story, it's not that. Tonight, we're peeling back the crusty layers of folklore, superstition, and pure nightmare fuel that flavored medieval meals. Because back then, food wasn't just food. It was medicine, it was magic, it was, quite literally, life or death. And sometimes, it was just cursed. So picture this. You're a peasant. You've worked all day digging mud out of your shoes and yelling at your goat. You finally sit down for dinner. What's on the menu? Some old cabbage bread so hard it could double as a weapon, maybe a turnip, and, if you're really lucky, something called pottage. Pottage was a kind of medieval soup sludge. You just throw in anything edible: barley, beans, a suspicious onion, herbs, yesterday's bone, and hope it didn't ferment overnight. It simmered all day over a fire. It never fully left the pot. It was food and potion and gamble, all in one. Now, rich folks had it better. Kind of. They ate swan, peacock, porpoise, and something called hedgehog pie, which, yes, was exactly what it sounds like. Also, meat jellies, lots of meat, inside jelly, because apparently medieval nobles looked at a roasted chicken and thought, you know what would make this better? If it wobbled. But beneath the surface of these feasts were stories, folklore recipes, passed down not just for flavor, but for survival. Take this one. Want to avoid demons at dinner? Eat garlic. Medieval folks believed strong-smelling foods kept evil spirits away. And possibly your dinner guests too. Want to attract love? Bake bread with rosemary and a lock of hair. Yes, hair. People were very into that. Think someone cursed your cow. Feed it bread soaked in holy water and sing it a hymn. If it starts mooing in Latin, maybe panic. Then there were the forbidden foods. Certain plants and animals were thought to be tied to the devil, or witches, or the underworld. Mandrake root was a famous one. People believed it screamed when pulled from the earth. Like, literally screamed, so loud it could kill you. To safely harvest it, you were supposed to tie the root to a dog, cover your ears, let the dog yank it out, hope the dog survived. Tragically, it often didn't, but once you had it, mandrake could supposedly heal illness, spark visions, or make you fertile. Totally worth the dog. Another cursed delicacy. Blood pudding, blood soup, blood bread. Medieval cooks used every part of the animal, including what came out of it. But folklore warned, if you didn't cook it right, the soul of the animal might stay trapped in your kitchen. People told stories of haunted pots, whispering pans, bread that refused to rise because it was cursed with bad vibes. And sometimes, those vibes weren't accidental. Let's talk about poison. Yet, real life and folklore. Medieval folks were terrified of being poisoned, especially nobles. So they hired food tasters, used silver spoons that were supposed to tarnish in the presence of toxins, and told stories of magical stones that could sweat when poison was near. Even the salt was suspicious. Some said spilling salt invited the devil to dinner. To fix it, you had to throw a pinch over your left shoulder, that old superstition. Still around today. Thanks. Medieval cooks. And then there was the corpse bread. Yes, you heard me. In some medieval villages, if someone died of a disease, they'd bake a loaf of bread using flour that had been rubbed on the corpse. Why? Because they believed it absorbed the illness. They then feed that bread to the sick, hoping to transfer the disease into the bread and out of the body. It was half folklore, half horror movie, and about 900% unhygienic. But when you had no medicine, no germ theory, and a desperate belief in magic, you got creative. And a little gross. Even water wasn't safe. Water could hold spirits. Wells were portals, and drinking from the wrong spring could make you lose your memory, or fall in love with a goose. Not making that up. Medieval love spells were wild. So, instead, many drank beer. Yes, even children, because ale was boiled, it was safer. So, your average 10-year-old medieval kid probably had more IPAs than you. But despite all this danger and weirdness, food was powerful. It connected families. It marked the seasons. It showed who you were and what you believed. That's why folklore wrapped around it so tightly. To explain it, to protect it, to enchant it. The Eternal Walker word count, approximately 1095 from your series, The Disturbing World of Medieval Folklore. Boring history for sleep. There's something haunting about the idea of never dying. At first glance, it sounds like a dream. Right. No death. No aging. Just more time. But now imagine that time stretches on forever. No rest, no home, no end. That's the legend of the Wandering Jew. One of the strangest and most misunderstood stories to come out of medieval Europe. It all begins, like so many things in folklore, with a warning. The earliest version shows up sometime in the 1200s. It tells of a man, usually unnamed, who was alive during the time of Jesus. The story goes like this. As Jesus was being led to his crucifixion, he paused to rest for a moment, and a man nearby mocked him, or shoved him, or told him to hurry up. The details change depending on the telling. Jesus looked at him and said something like, "You will walk until I return." And just like that, this man was cursed. Not to die, not to age, but to wander forever. This legend caught fire across medieval Europe. People began to whisper that he was still out there, walking from town to town, tired, tattered, unable to rest. Some said he had a long beard and eyes that had seen too much. Others claimed he was always clean-shaven, never aging, forever 30, give or take, and no matter how far he walked, he always had more road ahead. Now, let's pause here, because the name Wandering Jew has a long and complicated history. In the Middle Ages, people didn't see this character as just one man. They turned him into a symbol, one that reflected their fears, beliefs, and, unfortunately, their prejudices. Medieval Christians often used this story to reinforce anti-Semitic ideas. They saw the eternal wandering as a punishment, not just for one person, but for an entire group. And that is where things get deeply uncomfortable. This isn't just folklore. It's folklore twisted by bias, and it's important we talk about that, especially on a bedtime history channel like this. Because bedtime stories shouldn't just soothe, they should teach. Despite that dark twist, the tale of the eternal wanderer kept evolving. In some versions, he tries to help people, he warns of disasters, he shares wisdom, he even preaches kindness. After all, he's had a long time to think about what he did. In others, he's miserable and bitter. He begs to die. But every time death nears, it passes him by like a stranger on the road, and sometimes he just disappears into the crowd, only to show up again in the next town, the next year, the next century. Writers couldn't get enough of him. He popped up in medieval chronicles, plays, poems, each time a little different, but always walking. And not just in Europe. Versions of the Eternal Walker exist across cultures. The Flying Dutchman, a ghost ship doomed to sail forever. The Ahasverse legend, a name often given to the wandering man, and even echoes in Cain's punishment from the Bible, a life of endless exile. Marked and restless. There's something deep in human storytelling that latches onto this idea that endless wandering is its own kind of curse. In later centuries, especially during the Romantic period, the legend softened. Writers began asking, what if this wasn't just punishment? What if it was a journey? What if the wanderer was learning, searching for redemption, trying to right a wrong from long ago? Suddenly, he wasn't just a warning. He was a reflection of us. Of our mistakes, our regrets, our search for meaning. In a world that never stops moving, some modern takes even turn him into a sort of folk hero, a man who walks not because he was cursed, but because he chooses to witness history, to never forget, to carry the memory of what humanity has done and what it still might do, which, let's be honest, is a lot to carry. And maybe that's why this story stuck around for so long, because deep down, we all know the feeling of being restless, of not knowing where we're going, of walking forward, not because we want to, but because we can't stop. The Wandering Jew ain't just a man in a legend, he's a metaphor in boots, which is in the skyward count, approximately 1085 from your series, The Disturbing World of Medieval Folklore. Boring history for sleep. You know the image. A witch, black cloak, pointy hat, zooming across the moon on a broomstick like she's late for her coven's potluck. It's everywhere. Halloween decorations, cartoons, that one meme with the flying Roomba. But where did that idea actually come from? Why did medieval folks believe that witches flew, and not just flew, but had wild midnight parties in the sky? Buckle up, or strap in, because this chapter is about to get airborne. Back in the Middle Ages, people really believed witches could fly. Not metaphorically, literally. They thought witches soared through the night sky to attend secret Sabbaths, wild gatherings with music, dancing, feasting, and the occasional goat demon. These weren't your grandma's knitting circles. These were full-on magic festivals. And the only way to get there, not Uber, not a horse, not even a medieval scooter. Nope. You needed a broom. Now let's talk about the broomstick. Why that of all things? Well, the broom was a humble household tool. Every home had one. It was women's work, associated with the hearth, the kitchen, the mundane. So, of course, folklore twisted it into something wild and forbidden. Witches were believed to anoint their brooms with magical ointments, paste made of herbs, poisons, and possibly hallucinogens. Yes, things just got pharmaceutical. These so-called flying ointments were rubbed onto the body, and depending on the recipe, they could do some serious mind-bending. Nightshade, belladonna, henbane, mandrake, these herbs don't mess around. And here's where it gets spicy. Historical records suggest the ointment wasn't always applied to just the broom handle. It was applied more intimately, let's say, to areas with good absorption, which led to rumors of witches riding their brooms naked, flying in ecstasy. Were they physically flying? Probably not. More likely, they were tripping out medieval face in a damp hut, imagining they were dancing with the devil on a mountain. But try explaining that to a 15th century inquisitor. The idea of the witch's Sabbath became something of a medieval blockbuster. Here's how people described it. Witches would sneak out at night, smear their ointment, mount their broom, and fly through the air. Howling and laughing they'd gather in remote places, mountaintops, ruins, deep forests there. They'd feast, dance, chant spells, and pledge loyalty to Satan himself, who usually showed up as a goat. Because of course he did. The party usually ended with a reverse mass, a few curses, and flying home before sunrise. Basically, Coachella, but more goat sacrifices and fewer influencers. These weren't just bedtime stories. People were terrified of this idea. Churches warned about it. Villagers whispered about it. Authorities used it to justify real arrests and executions. If someone acted odd, lived alone, or had a cat that stared too long, people feared they might be flying to the Sabbath at night. And if crops failed or babies got sick, well, clearly some broom-based shenanigans were to blame. But was there any truth to the flying? Short answer, no. Longer answer, kind of. If you squint and ignore basic science. The herbs in those flying ointments really could cause visions. People might genuinely feel like they were flying, especially if they were isolated, frightened, or told repeatedly that they could fly if they were witches. In some confessions, often given under torture, accused women described vivid flights. But again, these were likely drug-fueled hallucinations, dreams, or things they were pressured to say. The line between folklore and fear got very blurry. Still, the image stuck. By the 1600s, artists were painting witches soaring through the night. Woodcuts showed them riding broomsticks over villages. Books warned people to lock their doors on full moons, just in case someone came flying by with bad intentions and a good ointment. It became a symbol. Women with power, knowledge of herbs, a link to the natural world. And for the medieval church, that was terrifying. So of course, they demonized it. But here's a twist. Not all versions of the flying witch were scary. In Slavic folklore, you've got Baba Yaga, a powerful old woman who flies in a giant mortar and pestle, sweeping the sky with a broom. She's creepy, sure, but also wise, magical, and sometimes helpful if you survive her tests. Other cultures have flying figures too. Not all of them evil. It's almost like the idea of women flying, of breaking free, was both feared and secretly admired. And today, that image, the broomstick, the moon, the cloak, it's iconic. Funny how a piece of dark, misunderstood folklore became something we now hang in kindergarten classrooms. The flying witch isn't just a symbol of fear anymore. She's a symbol of freedom, feminine power, and maybe just a little mischief. Which, if you ask me, is the best kind of bedtime story? When Wolves Were Men. Word count, approximately 1090 from your series, The Disturbing World of Medieval Folklore, Boring history for sleep, let's be honest. We all love a good werewolf story. The full moon, the growling transformation, the ripped tunic, the claws, the upside a sheep again moment. But back in medieval Europe, werewolves weren't movie monsters. They were real threats. Or at least, people thought they were. And unlike modern werewolves, these guys didn't just show up in spooky tales. They showed up in courtrooms. Yep. Welcome to the werewolf trials. Like the witch trials, but furrier. First off, let's rewind a bit. The belief in shape-shifting humans is ancient. Long before medieval Europe, people told stories of men turning into animals. In Norse mythology, warriors called berserkers would wear wolf or bear skins and fight in a trance-like rage. In ancient Greece, the legend of King Lycaon, where we get the word lycanthropy, told of a man who was turned into a wolf for feeding human flesh to Zeus. Classic party foul. So by the time we hit the medieval period, the idea of human-wolf hybrids was already baked into the folklore cake. But what changed was the fear. In the late Middle Ages and early Renaissance, people got seriously spooked by the idea that someone, your neighbor, your butcher, your cousin Dave, might be a werewolf. It wasn't just a bedtime story anymore. It became a criminal accusation. And in some places, especially in France, Germany, and Switzerland, suspected werewolves were hunted down and put on trial. Not metaphorically, legitimately, as in, you, sir, are hereby charged with turning into a wolf and eating 3 goats and possibly a child. And people were executed for it. Let's talk about a few of the famous cases. One of the most notorious was Peter Stump, also known as the werewolf of Bedburg. It was 1589 in Germany. Peter, a wealthy farmer, was accused of turning into a wolf and terrorizing the countryside. The court said he had killed livestock, murdered at least 14 people, eaten his own son. Yikes. Made a deal with the devil and, naturally, used a magical wolf belt to shapeshift. Was there any solid proof? Of course not. But under torture, Peter confessed to everything, as people often did back then when torture was involved. He was brutally executed, and the message was clear: beware the wolf in human clothing. But here's the weird part. In some regions, being a werewolf wasn't seen as evil at all. In parts of Estonia and Latvia, there were stories of good werewolves. They were called the Hounds of God, peasants who claimed they turned into wolves to fight the devil himself. One guy, named Thies of Kaltenbrunn, even went to court in 1692 and proudly declared, "Yep, I'm a werewolf, but I'm a holy werewolf." He said he and other werewolves went into hell 3 times a year to battle witches and save crops. And you know what? The court didn't know what to do with that. They fined him and let him go. So not all werewolves were monsters. Some were the medieval avengers, apparently, but most of the time, the idea of a werewolf was wrapped up in fear. Fear of nature, fear of violence, fear of the unknown, and if something horrible happened, say, a child disappeared or a cow turned up mauled, people needed a reason. A villain, a name. Sometimes, that villain wasn't a stranger. It was someone they already knew. Someone who acted strange, lived alone, or maybe just had bad luck and pointy teeth. The church got in on it too. They taught that lycanthropy was tied to the devil, a curse, or even a punishment for sin, which meant that werewolves weren't just dangerous, they were heretical. This added a whole new layer to the panic. Now, it wasn't just about stopping the beast. It was about saving souls. Or, more often, burning them. And yet, for all the fear, werewolves never disappeared from folklore. If anything, they grew more popular. Over time, the story shifted from cursed peasants to tragic figures. By the 1800s, werewolves started to appear in literature as sympathetic monsters. Cursed, misunderstood, trying to control their animal side. Kind of like us, right? Maybe that's why the myth stuck. Because deep down, we all have a little beast in us. Anger, instinct, the part that wants to howl when things get too much. Of course, today we mostly keep werewolves in movies and Halloween masks, but if you ever hear a strange howl on a foggy night, or spot someone acting oddly during a full moon, well, maybe it's nothing. Or maybe it's just a guy named Peter who really hates sheep. Either way, tuck in a little tighter. Asterisk. Creatures that shouldn't exist. Word count. Approximately 1095 from your series, The Disturbing World of Medieval Folklore. Boring history for sleep. Some animals are just weird, like the platypus, which looks like it was made by committee, or the anglerfish, the stuff of deep-sea nightmares. But those are real animals, the ones we're talking about tonight. Not so much. These were the creatures of medieval folklore. Animals that weren't just odd. They were wrong. Things that skulked in shadows, shrieked in the night, and made villagers say, "Nope, that's the devil's chicken. I'm going back inside." So settle in, because tonight, we're going hunting for the monsters between species, the misfits, the hybrids, the maybe -I-saw -it- but -I-hope -I-did and single quotes TBs. Let's start with the owlman. Now, you might be thinking, owlman, isn't that just Batman's weird cousin? Sort of. The owlman is a more recent legend, spotted in Cornwall, England in the 1970s, but it has deep medieval roots. Picture this, a giant owl, the size of a man, with glowing red eyes and leathery wings. Locals described it as flapping silently above old churches and graveyards. Sometimes, it just hovered, watching, judging. The medieval connection. Owlman sounds a lot like the Strix, a creature from Roman and medieval bestiaries. The Strix was a vampiric birdwoman that flew at night and fed on children. Fun bedtime story? Right. Basically, if you crossed an owl, a banshee, and your sleep paralysis demon, you'd get the Strix. Or owlman. Then there's the black shuck. Now this one. This one haunted roads across East Anglia. It was a giant black dog with burning red eyes, sometimes one eye, sometimes two, and it had a habit of appearing when something very bad was about to happen. Think of it as the medieval Grim Reaper's emotional support animal. If you saw the black shuck, that meant death was coming, for you, or someone close. Sometimes it showed up during storms. Sometimes it walked through locked doors. And on more than one occasion, people said it appeared in churches, howled once, then vanished into the wall. Great. Just what every priest wants while giving a sermon, a demon dog doing a drive-by. The idea of hellhounds wasn't unique to England either. All across medieval Europe, people whispered about phantom dogs, often tied to the wild hunt. Remember that from earlier chapters. These beasts ran with ghosts and gods, hunting sinners and lost souls. But even when they were alone, they were terrifying. The Barghest of northern England, a goblin dog that foretold death. The church grim, a spectral dog that haunted churchyards and protected graves. The Gabriel hounds, whose howling was said to be the sound of souls in torment. Flying over hedgehogs were man's best friend. Until they weren't. But let's leave canines behind for something weirder. Ever heard of the basilisk? This was one of the most feared monsters in medieval folklore. And no, not just because Harry Potter made it cool. The medieval basilisk wasn't just a snake. It was a nightmare blend of serpent, rooster, and sometimes lizard. It was born, allegedly, when a rooster laid an egg, and that egg was then hatched by a toad, which, already, feels like nature is being trolled. The creature that emerged could kill you with a glance, poison the ground it walked on wilt plants with its breath, and explode birds mid-flight with a hilariously. That was in the books. Exploding birds, the Middle Ages were a lot. The only way to kill a basilisk, make it see its own reflection, or send in a weasel. Yes, a weasel. Because apparently, weasels were basilisk-proof. Who knew? Of course, not. All these creatures were terrifying. Some were just strange, like the cockatrice, which is basically the basilisk's slightly dumber cousin. Half chicken, half dragon, equally deadly, but with the added indignity of possibly clucking while committing murder. Or the amphisbaena, a two-headed snake with a head on both ends, so it could bite you no matter which direction it was going. Also, allegedly, it glowed in the dark and walked on legs, because why not? And let's not forget the jaculus, a flying snake that launched itself out of trees like a medieval javelin. Snake? Yes. Bird? No. Projectile? Absolutely. Many of these creatures appeared in bestiaries, those medieval books that tried to catalog every animal, real or imagined. Some of the entries were scientific, others absolutely bananas. Like the bonnekin, a bull-like creature that, when threatened, would launch acidic poop behind itself. That's not a joke. That's actually what it was said to do. Picture a majestic beast galloping through the woods, leaving a trail of fire and regret. That's the bonnekin for you. So why did people believe in all this? Simple. The medieval world was dark, dangerous, and full of unknowns. People heard strange noises in the woods, saw odd shapes in the mist, found dead livestock with no clear cause, and when you don't have science, or flashlights, or sleep apps, your brain fills in the blanks with owlmen and monster chickens. These creatures explained things. They gave fear a face, a tail, and sometimes explosive rear-end powers. Today, we look back and laugh, but to the folks in medieval villages, these beasts weren't jokes. They were warnings, symbols, stories passed down to keep kids from wandering into the forest at night. And hey, maybe there's still some truth in them. After all, the night is a little weirder than we'd like to admit. The devil's bargain, demons, packs, and the price of power. Word count, approximately 1095 from your series, The Disturbing World of Medieval Folklore. Boring history for sleep. You know those moments where someone says, "I'd give anything to have that," and then the sky rumbles and the candles flicker. Yeah, classic setup, because tonight we're diving into a legend that terrified medieval folks across Europe and beyond, making a deal with the devil. And no, it's not just a rock and roll thing. This was serious business. Now, let's get one thing straight. In the medieval world, Satan wasn't just the boogeyman. He was a legal force. He had rules, contracts, fine print. You didn't just fall into sin, you could negotiate your way there, which makes this chapter basically one long episode of medieval hell's lawyer. So, what exactly was a devil's bargain? In short, a person offers their soul in exchange for something big: money, power, knowledge, revenge, or even just, slightly better farming weather. And unlike fairy godmothers, the devil was all about the catch. Maybe your wish would come true, but at a terrible cost. Or, B, you'd get what you asked for, but not the way you expected. Think monkey's paw, but in Latin. The most famous example. The Legend of Faust. Now, the Faust tale came into print a bit later, 16th century, but the roots are medieval. Here's the gist. Faust was a brilliant scholar, but he wanted more knowledge that no university or priest could offer. So he summoned a demon, usually Mephistopheles, and struck a deal. He'd get 24 years of ultimate knowledge and magical power, and then his soul belonged to hell. He got what he wanted: riches, romance, the secrets of the universe, but when the clock ran out, let's just say he didn't get a retirement party. The Faust story became the template for devil deals all across Europe. And suddenly, pacts weren't just scary stories, they were possible crimes. People were actually accused of making deals with demons. Some were tried as heretics, others as witches, and yes, some were just unlucky folks who read too many weird books and lived alone, because of course they did. But here's the wild part. Making a deal with the devil wasn't always seen as completely irrational. In some folk traditions, especially in the late medieval and early Renaissance periods, people actually believed you could outsmart the devil. Like, yeah, sure, I'll sell my soul, but I'll find a loophole later. Classic medieval main character energy. Some stories even show the devil getting tricked. One peasant wrote the deal on parchment made from communion bread, so it couldn't be held by demonic hands. Another made sure to sell his shadow instead of his soul. One guy drew a magic circle so the devil couldn't leave, and then refused to sign anything. Just interviewed him. Turns out, if you read the fine print and carry garlic, you might just survive a demon meeting. But not all deals were clever or symbolic. Some were disturbingly literal. In the 14th and 15th centuries, especially in parts of France and Germany, trial records talk about people confessing to meeting devils in person, under torture. Of course, they describe rituals in the woods, naked oaths, signing contracts in blood, and sometimes a charming devil would appear as a man in black, offering everything they wanted for just one signature. Sound familiar? That's because the man in black trope stuck around. He's shown up in folklore, blues music, ghost stories, even roadside diners, if you're into creepypasta. And here's where things got even weirder. The church actually had guidelines for what counted as a valid pact with the devil. Seriously, if you verbally agreed, it was bad. If you signed something, even worse, if you performed a ritual or summoned demons on purpose, well, congratulations, you were probably going to get burned. The line between heresy, witchcraft, and demonic contracts got very blurry in the late medieval era, which meant, once again, fear did most of the work. But why was this such a powerful idea? Because in the Middle Ages, everything was about the soul. If you were poor, sick, or outcast, and someone whispered that you could change it all with a few magic words, would you say no? Even if you believed it might cost you later. That tension between need and damnation made devil's bargains one of the most haunting themes in folklore. It wasn't just about punishment, it was about choice. And that's scarier than any monster. Of course, in bedtime story tradition, we end with a warning. If a man in black offers you something that sounds too good to be true, it probably is. If your success came out of nowhere and there's a burning smell, check your contract. And if you find yourself standing at a crossroads at midnight, thinking about the price of things, go home, make some tea. You're already enough. And that, dear listener, is the final tale in our journey through the disturbing world of medieval folklore. We've wandered through haunted woods, stood trial with pigs, danced with plague spirits, and now narrowly avoided eternal damnation. Not bad for a bedtime history lesson, huh? Sleep well. Don't summon anything in your dreams. And if you hear someone knocking 3 times just before dawn, it's probably just the cat. Probably.